What's up everyone, the Game 2K2 here again, and today I continue my review of the Tony Hawk's franchise with Tony Hawk's American Wasteland. With American Wasteland, Neversoft once again builds on the gameplay that the previous few games had done, but this time wanted to make a couple significant changes to it that would play huge roles in the future of the franchise. First we have the story mode, which sees some changes. The first big change is that it actually feels like a story and not just an oversized mission like the previous games. You play a character who goes to LA, and after not being warmly received by a couple of locals, he meets a girl named Mindy who he becomes friends with, and she introduces him to her friends, who then show him a skating park that they are working on called the Skate Ranch. Throughout most of the story, you collect pieces for the park to complete its construction, and while doing this process, you participate in the skating competition hosted by Tony Hawk called the Am Jam. One of the reasons why this story seems so much better is the fact that it remains in one city with one overall plot instead of several cities that take you through too many plots, which was a problem with Underground 1 and 2. It has you focusing on one mission for a good portion of the game, and the cutscenes and dialogue for the story are a little more down to earth and not so over the top. However, despite how much I love the story, it still contains the same problem as before, and that's its short length. The game can be beaten in only a few hours, which is around the same length as Underground 2, which is definitely a problem. Again, the entire game takes place in one big city, and for this game it's LA. And not only that, but Neversoft tries to make it to where you no longer have to pause the game and choose which part of the city you want to go to. They try to make it to where it's one big city with no loading times. However, due to the limitation of the consoles, in order to get to the different areas of the city, you have to go through hallways and passageways, which are pretty much the loading times in the game. Because while you're going through the passageways, the other areas are loading, and you can kind of tell because the frame rate jumps during this process. A lot of fans didn't like the passageways, but with all new features, there's always going to be flaws, so I was able to look past that problem very easily. For me, it actually works out a lot better than I thought it would, because my initial fear was that each part of the city would look the exact same. All the previous games had different maps, and each map had their own look and their own style, so that there was variety. And with this game taking place in one city, I thought it would lose all of that. But they managed to make the various parts of the city different in appearance, and each part has their own type of look and personality. However, there is one problem, and that's each part of the city is not quite as big as the individual maps from the previous game. In fact, if you were to look at them as individual maps, a few of them wouldn't even live up to the size of the maps from the very first Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. But in all honesty, that's a small problem. There's still enough in each area to make them fun to skate around. Now we move on to the game's missions, which are a pretty mixed bag. I do love the missions that have you getting the pieces to the skate ranch. Those particular missions added something new to the gameplay, and I'm sure many other fans, definitely welcome good new gameplay. However, the rest of the missions is where you quickly learn that Neversoft was starting to run out of ideas, because a good portion of the game has you learning things that the previous games had already taught you. This is definitely not new for any franchise, but considering that the Tony Hawk's franchise was on its 7th game, repeating missions definitely grows old by that point. Because of this flaw, the game seems much easier than ever, which is sad because ever since the story mode has been introduced to the Tony Hawk's franchise, the gameplay seemed to get easier anyways. So now that it's even easier with American Wasteland, that just makes things worse. Like Underground 2, the classic mode was brought back, and once again I was very happy to see this mode again. Since the story mode was so short and easy, the classic mode adds a bit of challenge, and believe me, it was definitely needed. The game appears on 2 generations of consoles. It appears on the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube, and is the first Tony Hawk's game to appear on a current generation console, appearing on the Xbox 360. I'll start with the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube. Graphically, the game is not too different from Underground 2, but there were some small, subtle changes on certain versions. The Xbox version comes out on top from a visual standpoint because the character models and the environments look better overall. The only thing that disappoints me about the Xbox is the loading times. The loading times are easily the worst aspect of the Xbox version. There are actually moments where I'll go through the hallways, and when I reach the door to go to another area of the city, it won't open because it's still loading. But I'm not sure whether it's just my copy or not, because I had to buy a used copy of the Xbox version. The PS2 version comes in second and overall looks the same. I think the only thing that's noticeably different is the detail of the environments. They're not quite as sharp. The loading times, however, are much better on the PS2 version. Everything loads up pretty well. A small problem is the sound, but it is small because the sound does get a little jumpy on occasions, but it's not that bad. The GameCube version is, again, not that different. The only thing that bothers me about the GameCube version is that the game's frame rate is not the steadiest. There's also a colorization difference with the GameCube version. It's not quite as good, but that doesn't bother me at all. The frame rate, however, does bother me. I wish it was steadier. Then, of course, we move into the Xbox 360 version, which not only disappoints me, but it's easily one of the worst debuts a long-running franchise can make onto a new console. Graphically, while this game might look beautiful on older consoles, it looks really ugly on the 360. The reason why is because Neversoft didn't even attempt to change the graphical look of American Wasteland for the 360. Now, one difference that is rather noticeable is the game does look slightly smoother. The 3D graphics and the character models look more noticeable on the 360 version. However, it's a problem because the character models are still blocky and the objects in the game still look very flat. So that smoother appearance actually makes the game look worse. The only thing I can say about the Xbox 360 version is that the loading times are wonderful for both getting to the other parts of the city and also when going into cutscenes, but that's really about it. With the PC version, I'm also a little disappointed with because the PC's graphics are always on par, if not better, than the current generation of consoles. So seeing it look like the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube versions does make the version a letdown for me too. And I really hate saying that because the PC version usually always comes out on top for this particular franchise. However, if I had to say anything about the PC version, is that like the 360, it does run the smoothest, which is better than having no good qualities at all. The final part I'll go over is the online, which American Wasteland is most notable for being the first Tony Hawk's game to be on Xbox Live, which I was very happy with, and I'm very surprised it took so long because Xbox Live had been running for a good few years up to that point. So I'm finally able to compare the online modes. They both have the same features, but both run very differently, and for that reason I have to say that Xbox Live is the best online to play a Tony Hawk's game on. I've played the game on both the PS2's online and Xbox Live, and the game runs far smoother on Xbox Live. Overall, while I will admit that the story is entertaining and I think the one big city concept pans out a lot better than expected, it really only boils down to the core gameplay, which has very little to no new elements added to it, which doesn't make the game worth the time, which is truly unfortunate. Well everyone, that's it for now. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.